Welcome to E-Bible Fellowship's Evening Bible Studies in the Book of Genesis. For more studies and information, visit ebiblefellowship.org. And now, with your Genesis study, here's your host and Bible teacher, Chris McCann.
Let me read again in Genesis 33, verse 13. And he said unto him, My Lord knoweth that the children are tender, and the flocks and herds with young are with me. And if men should overdrive them one day, all the flock will die. Let my Lord, I pray thee, pass over before his servant, and I will lead on softly, according as the cattle that goeth before me, and the children be able to endure, until I come unto my Lord unto Seir. Now I mentioned that Jacob's family and flocks typify the great multitude, and we've spent time talking about that. And here I think we have a little spiritual reference to what we've thought and have talked about in the past regarding the great multitude that God saved out of great tribulation in our day, that many of them are young. Many that God saved were more than likely in their mother's womb. They were toddlers, little children around the world. And not saying all were, of course. God saved people of all ages. But when we're looking at great multitude and numbers, perhaps 170, 180, 185 million, we don't know exactly the number, but it's possible where God saves 15, 20, 30 million, 40 million adults or whatever, and the vast majority are very young, which would serve to protect them over the course of this prolonged judgment for a number of years, as their parents would watch out for them, and it would also allow the Lord to do what he is planning on doing to get that word to them in order that the sheep be fed. And again, as we look at the language here, the reference to the children being tender, the flocks and herds with young, and the need for Jacob to lead on softly, according as the cattle that goeth before me, and the children be able to endure. Very significant language that is indicating that most with Jacob are very young. They're extremely young, and as flocks and children, although, again, historically we know that the ages of some of his sons, 9 years old, teenagers, and things like that. So they're not infants, actually, but that's not the point. The language of the Bible is giving the impression they are very young. Now, in Genesis 33, verse 13, where we read, the flocks and herds with young are with me, the Hebrew word translated with young is 5763 in the Hebrew Concordance. It has a related word that is found in Isaiah 49 in verse 15. Isaiah chapter 49, verse 15 says, Can a woman forget her sucking child, that she should not have compassion on the son of her womb? Yea, they may forget, yet will I not forget thee. So the sucking child is the same word that's translated with young. And so God is indicating he will not forget his people who would be likened to the sucking child. And this sucking child, the Hebrew word here is 5764. So it's related to our word, not exactly the same word. And also we find the very same word, 5763, in a couple of places. Let's go to Psalm 78. Psalm 78, and I'll start reading in verse 70 through the end of the psalm. He chose David also his servant, and took him from the sheepfolds, from following the ewes great with young. He brought him to feed Jacob his people, and Israel his inheritance. So he fed them according to the integrity of his heart, and guided them by the skillfulness of his hands. He chose David, a type of Christ, took him from the sheepfolds. So David, who was a shepherd, is taken from being a literal shepherd and then becomes a shepherd over God's people, just as Christ is the good shepherd. And so we read in verse 71, from following the ewes great with young, he brought him to feed Jacob his people. And with young is the same word. And one more place, one more passage in Isaiah chapter 40, Isaiah 40, we read in verses 10 and 11, behold, the Lord Jehovah will come with strong hand, and his arm shall rule for him. Behold, his reward is with him, and his work before him. Now, the language in that verse points to Judgment Day. You can compare it to Revelation 22:12. Behold, I come quickly, and my reward is with me, to give every man according as his work shall be. And here the Lord Jehovah will come with strong hand, and his arm shall rule for him. When Christ came to judge the earth on May 21, 2011, what does Revelation 19:15 tell us? He will smite the nations and rule them with a rod of iron. And the word rule there is translated as feed in John 21, feed my sheep. So the same rod or word that smites the nations simultaneously serves to feed the sheep, the great multitude that the Lord saved. And then it goes on to say in Isaiah 40, verse 11, he shall feed his flock like a shepherd. So we see the dual purpose. His arm will rule, verse 10, and then the feeding. In the next verse, he shall feed his flock like a shepherd. He shall gather the lambs with his arm, and carry them in his bosom, and shall gently lead those that are with young. With young is the word we're following, 5763. It's the word lead, gently lead. Gently is not in the text, but it's the word lead, which is Strong's number 5095, that we find back in Genesis 33. In Genesis 33, in verse 14, let my Lord, I pray thee, pass over before his servant, and I will lead on softly, according as the cattle that goeth before me, and the children be able to endure, until I come unto my Lord, unto Seir. So we see the similar idea between Isaiah 40, verses 10 and 11, in the context of God will come and feed his flock like a shepherd. He'll gather the lambs in his arm, carry them in his bosom, and gently lead those that are with young. There too, in that verse in Isaiah 40, Christ comes as judge. It's Judgment Day. He leads his flock, feeds and leads his flock, and they're said to be with young. So he has to go on gently. That is, the traveling, the journey over the course of the prolonged Judgment Day period to the very last day, which will take us out of this world and into the new heaven and new earth, into what the land of Canaan typified, and God is leading his flock gently along, softly along. He's going slow, in other words. He's not going quickly, but carefully directing and guiding his sheep all the way, and this way they will endure. Remember the verse in Matthew 24, he that endureth unto the end shall be saved. And so this is the wonderful spiritual picture that is starting to emerge here, where no, the law will not bring them across, but Christ himself will lead them softly or gently, and they will come finally through endurance over the grievous period of time of the prolonged judgment day to the conclusion of all these things. Now, the word lead, again, 5095, is the same word in Genesis 33 as well as in Isaiah 40 verse 11, and also it's found in Isaiah 49. We read one verse earlier, verse 15, but let's go back now to Isaiah 49, and we read in verse 10, they shall not hunger nor thirst, neither shall the heat nor sun smite them, for he that hath mercy on them shall lead them, even by the springs of water shall he guide them. And it's actually guide. I want to get this correct. I stumbled earlier, but I think I got this straight. The word guide them is this Hebrew word 5095 translated lead. So by the springs of water shall he guide them. And, this verse is quoted or picked up in Revelation chapter 7, in the context of the great multitude. You remember Revelation 7, verse 9, said, after this I beheld, and lo, a great multitude, which no man could number, of all nations and kindreds and people and tongues, stood before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes and palms in their hands. And then the question's asked, where they come from? And the answer was given in verse 14, and I said unto him, Sir, thou knowest. And he said to me, these are they which came out of great tribulation, and have washed their robes, and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Therefore are they before the throne of God, and serve him day and night in his temple, and he that sitteth on the throne shall dwell among them. They shall hunger no more, neither thirst any more, neither shall the sun light on them, nor any heat. Now, again, Revelation 7, verse 16, speaking of the great multitude, they shall hunger no more, neither thirst any more, neither shall the sun light on them, nor any heat, for the Lamb which is in the midst of the throne shall feed them. And this word feed is the word translated rule in Revelation 19, verse 15, in the context of Judgment Day. Christ, the Word of God, will smite the nations, and he will rule them with a rod of iron. The word rule is the same word translated feed in some other scriptures like John 21, and here in Revelation 7:17, the Lamb in the midst of the throne shall feed them. The Lord God who will come in Isaiah 40 will feed them and gently lead them. He'll guide them. That's what it goes on to say here. For the Lamb which is in the midst of the throne shall feed them and shall lead them unto living fountains of waters, and God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. It's happening now. It's happening at this time, as far as Isaiah 40 and as far as Revelation 7 and Genesis 33 is picking up on it with this exodus, this departure from Haran and going to Canaan. That's why I wanted to read in Genesis 33 that in verse 18, and Jacob came to Shalem, a city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan. He went to Canaan and he gently led his children and his flocks to the promised land. It's again an encouraging historical parable that once more it's just bringing additional support to many things we already know, and that's good when you see these things in the Bible when we're looking for spiritual meanings and it happens to fit in a framework that the Bible has revealed and we see clearly. Then we can know, well, yeah, we're on the right track. We're finding more truth, more information that God is revealing to his people at the time of the end.
Thank you for joining us for E-Bible Fellowship's Evening Bible Studies with your host and Bible teacher, Chris McCann. For more studies and information, visit our website at www.ebiblefellowship.org. Until our next Bible study, may the Lord's perfect will be done.